Good morning. My name is Robert, and I am a sexaholic. I'm powerless over lust, and my sobriety date is January 3rd, 1991. My home group is the Surrendered group in Norcross, Georgia. I'd like to thank Will and the committee for inviting me to speak this morning. It's always an honor and a privilege. I'd like to start with a prayer. And I'm also a recovering alcoholic. And in my home group when I lived in Charleston, South Carolina, one night we were talking about the 11th step, and everybody was talking about their method of prayer and meditation. And there was one member of the group, a guy by the name of Shoopy, and Shoopy had been sober a long time, but had also drank for a long time, and he had brain damage, wet brain from his years of abusing alcohol. And Shoopy wasn't the brightest bulb in the room, but God, he had just had this rock solid program. And as we were going around the room talking, Shoopy, when it came time for Shoopy to speak, Shoopy said, "Yeah, I pray every day. I get out of bed and I get on my knees and I say, God, don't let me be stupid today." I love that prayer. In fact, I started this morning like that. As a child, I was sexually molested. I grew up in a household that had a violent and abusive parent, an alcoholic, sex addict, and used to get beat a lot. And today I understand that as a child that grows up in an environment like that and experiences those things, pretty much what you can look forward to is a life of alcoholism, drug addiction, and sexual dysfunction. And I think a lot of the reason why I drank and used the way that I did was my inability to deal with my S stuff. I like to say that the Lord got me sober, and that was Judge Lord in El Cajon, California. I started showing up in the California correctional system, and this guy, Judge Lord, told me that I was a homicide looking for a place to happen, and it wasn't going to happen in San Diego County, that I was going to do some time. And he got my attention. And as a condition, eventually as a condition of release, I agreed to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I think it was like 9 months. I had to go to 2 a week. But my life changed. At my first meeting, it was a speakers meeting. And it was at the War Memorial Building in Balboa Park. And I mean, there were 500 people in this room. And this guy told his story. And what he said was that, he wasn't crazy. He was sick. And he did a lot of the same things that I had done. And he said that his body had an allergy that was coupled with a mental obsession. And that if we didn't drink, went to meetings, got a sponsor, worked the steps, life would get better. And if we didn't, and we were an alcoholic of his type, life would get worse. Well, I started going to meetings and got sober. But with my self-will and my great intellect, I realized that, I could do this myself and make sense of the 12 steps and 12 traditions by myself. And I got to decide just by myself, just what I would think and how I would act. And And the end result was 5 years in relapse, 3 years in relapse, 1 year in relapse, 3 years yet again, clean and sober, sitting naked on my bedroom floor with a gun in my mouth. I tried living life drinking and using, and that didn't work. And I tried life living sober, and that was worse. And if there is a hell on earth, that's got to be it. Well, I pointed out to my sponsor, that night my life changed. Now, I didn't pull the trigger, but I lost my life that night. And I surrendered to God in a way that I had never done that before. And I became willing. And I was given the gift of desperation. And I got desperate enough to ask this guy to be my sponsor. And he didn't say yes. What he said was, come on over to the house and we'll talk about it. And I went over to his house and I kind of told him what was going on. And I was a self-made man. And he said, Robert, you used unskilled labor. I have a lot of mixed emotions today about our fellowship and recovery. And on the one hand, I am more excited about my recovery today than I've ever been in my life. And for those of you that are mathematically challenged, when I get my sobriety date, I have 20 years. And it just keeps getting better. On the other hand, I go to meetings and, God, I see so much unnecessary suffering that, it's kind of like lapse, relapse, repeat. And, it doesn't have to be that way. That we are given the way out. And, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. The white book, this is my white book, I've kind of disguised it, but the white book changed my life. There is so much great stuff in the white book, but this is graduate material. This is master level material. You can read it, but you're not going to really understand it until you understand what's in the big book and the 12 and 12. What's in the white book constantly references what is in these two books. And, one of the things that the big book says in the preface is, because this book became the basic text of our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists a sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left untouched in the course of revisions made for both the second and third editions. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. Now, a textbook, when we're all familiar with textbooks, most of us didn't like them in school, but, we know what they are. And a textbook is used to communicate information and meaning from the mind of one human being to another. Now, the program that is written in this book works. It has a better than 75% recovery rate. I don't think we have anything near that in the fellowships today. And when I say fellowships, in my AA home group last year, our area representative came back and told us that as of last year, Alcoholics Anonymous had licensed more than 300 organizations to use the 12 steps. Think about that a minute. 300 organizations have been able to use this program of recovery successfully to treat whatever kind of problem they got. OA, EA, DA, GA, NA, it just goes on. Now, this is an interpretation of what is in this. And what I would suggest is that you never let anybody interpret for you the basic text. Now, you can get familiar with the basic text, and then this is going to make incredibly more sense. And this interpretation is divine. But you're not going to understand this until you understand this. You know, the 12 steps, you know, as it, there's the big book, the white book, the 12 and 12. This book was written in 1939, and there were growing pains. You know, as people read that big book and interpreted it, they found that there were problems. And the problems were many, and it had to do with, you know, how we interact with each other as human beings. How do we practice the spiritual principles? That it says in the big book that the program was derived mainly from science and religion. And, you know, I read just a second ago about the medical view. If anybody's interested, 2 years ago in Nashville, we had a medical doctor. It was the first time I'd ever heard a non-sexaholic address the fellowship. Burns Brady gave a 2-hour talk on the doctor's opinion as it's written in the big book. But more than that, he talked about the 75 years of intervening science that has been done that confirms what they were talking about 75 years ago. And he talked about, you know, the advancements in technology with electroencephalographic tomography, you know, the functional MRIs where you can watch the brain light up and how it works and all. And if anybody's interested, you can email me, and I would be happy to send you a link where you can download and listen to that. My email address is for robert2c@gmail.com. The number 4, Robert, the number 2, the letter C, for robert2c@gmail.com. I'd be happy to send you a link. Great stuff. That's kind of on the science end. On the religious end, you know, the program evolved out of the Oxford groups. That the Oxford groups were like 1840 to 1860 up to around the 1900 turn of the century. Or I'm sorry, the Oxford groups were about 1880, 1890 up to around 1940. And Bill and Bob, when they got together, were both members of Oxford groups. When Bill, who was a periodic alcoholic, would go out on these benders and it'd get physically challenged, he'd drop 40 pounds and be experiencing DTs, and his brother-in-law was a medical doctor, and they'd put him in the town's hospital for treatment. Well, their treatment at that time was drying him out and getting him in a physically stable condition, getting him back on solid food, and then tell him, you know, don't do this anymore. Very effective. Silkworth, the doctor there, was an epidemiologist. And CDC has tons of epidemiologists, and they kind of track the nature and patterns of diseases. Silkworth, his life career was not about, his life choice was not about working with alcoholics. He didn't particularly like alcoholics when he first started. But it was during the Depression, and he couldn't get a job anywhere else. So he went to work at Towns, and he's looking at all these alcoholics, and he says, you know, it appears to me that you guys have an allergy. You know, that you seem to be fairly intelligent and personable, nice people until you drink, and then you get kind of goofy. And you know, an allergy is nothing more than an abnormal reaction. You know, if you're allergic to bee stings, you get stung, you know, blow up. If you're allergic to strawberries and you eat strawberries, you break out in hives. If you're allergic to grasses, one thing or another, and have hay fever, you get watery eyes and runny nose and stuff. For the alcoholic, and I also think the sexaholic, the symptom of the allergy is craving. That we want more. You know, the first time I take that lust hit, my immediate response is to want the second. I want to build it and develop a story and a fantasy and everything. And then the obsession kicks in. And it's like, okay, how do I get the time to set aside to act out? Who am I going to act out with? Do I need money? And I start obsessing about how I'm going to make this thing happen. Well, Silkworth said, don't take the first drink, you won't get drunk, But that in and of itself is not enough. I mean, Bill relapsed 3 times out of Towns Hospital. And he had relapsed his last time, and his old running buddy, Ebby, called him up and said he wanted to come over, and Bill said, yeah, come on over, and we'll have some booze. And Ebby showed up, and Bill knew that Ebby was supposed to be committed involuntarily for alcoholic insanity a couple months earlier, and Ebby shows up looking better than Bill's seen him in years, and had this glow about him. And what's going on, Ed? And sit down and have a drink. Ed says, no, I ain't drinking. And Bill says, why not? And he says, well, I found religion. And Bill says, crap, my gin will last longer than his preaching. Have a seat. But what Ebby did is he told him a story. And he told him the story of the Oxford groups. Now, the Oxford groups had actually evolved out of the first century Christian fellowship, which was like 1840, 1860, up until the turn of the century. Now, the first century Christian fellowship, it was Bible-reading, church-going people that were reading their Scripture, and they're seeing that the apostles were performing all these miracles, and they looked around and they said, well, where's the miracle workers? How come we don't see today what those early Christians were doing? And so they started studying what those first century Christians were doing, and they figured that studying those guys, there would be less garbling of the message over time, and they'd be closer to that original message. And the 3 basic tenets of the first century Christian fellowship were confession, restitution, and service. Confession, step 5, restitution 9, and service 12. And where I got this information, if you read like A.A. Comes of Age and Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers and Bill's Passing On and stuff, it's all there. And what they would do is they would get together at somebody's house midweek, and they would lead with their weakness, confession, and they would state, my name is Frank, and I'm a rageaholic. Of course, he wouldn't say he's a rageaholic, but he'd say, I got a problem with my temper. I got a real short temper, a real short fuse. It's small town, Midwest America, 1880. There's no unemployment. There's no welfare. The boss said something pissed me off. I knocked him in the mouth and fired me on the spot. I've been blacklisted. I haven't worked in 6 weeks. There's no money. My kids are hungry. The landlord's going to evict us. My life is in the pits because of this character defect of mine. And Phyllis would say, I'm a glutton. I weigh 400 pounds. And my eating is such that, my life is a mess. My family won't talk to me. They've disowned me. I'm a baker by trade. My cousin's niece asked me to bake the cake, the wedding cake, and like the night before the wedding, I don't know, I ate the second layer. The reception was ruined. It cast a pall over the whole wedding. Nobody will talk to me. I mean, my life is the pits because of my character defect, my gluttony. And Bill would raise his hand and say, my name's Bill, and I'm an alcoholic. My name's Robert, I'm a sexaholic. You ever wonder where that comes from? And one of my, I'm reminded that a fanatic is someone that redoubles their effort after they've lost sight of the goal. And, initially when people would come over the house, if somebody comes over to my house and we're going to have a meeting, they say, my name's Robert and I'm a sexaholic. I only got to say that once. About the 10th time when he's sitting in the living room, it's like, my name's Robert and I'm a sexaholic. It's like, I'm not stupid. How many times are you going to have to tell me this? Confession, anyway. Confession is leading with our weakness, transparency. And restitution is the restoring of the broken relationship. The truth is that we're spiritual beings living in a spiritual universe, governed by spiritual laws, having a human experience. And that if we saw things the way that God sees things, there would be harmony in the universe. And my problem is that I show up with this little bit of God stuff bouncing into other people with my selfishness, self-centeredness, and other character defects, and I leave this wake of emotional trauma. People hear my name, and they want to spit and curse. And what I've done is I've issued them an invitation to show up as their worst self, to desire revenge and retaliation. And I don't think that that's how God wants things to be. What I need to do is try and restore that broken relationship, at least to the point of neutrality that I had before I showed up with my stinking thinking, rotten attitude, and bad behavior. And then service to God and our fellows. Well, part of the service was witnessing. And part of their program of spiritual action was to go witness to one another. So Frank had to go find people with short tempers, and Phyllis had to go find gluttons, and Ebby had to go find Bill. Now, as Bill's working with these concepts, he also recognizes that the alcoholics of the day, because of their chemical abuse, their drug abuse, had damaged brains. And so he kind of filled in some additional steps so that the alcoholic couldn't kind of wiggle out in the cracks. Step 1 is about powerlessness and unmanageability. It's about the recognition of the disease. And apparently Bill Wilson, for the first time in human history, Silkworth gave him the solution, the medical solution. You have an allergy, don't take the first drink, you won't get drunk. It's a physical allergy coupled with a mental obsession. And Ebby gave him the spiritual program of action that would enable him to find that spiritual, moral ease that will allow him to not take that first drink. Step 2 is there is a way out. We don't have to live in that condemned state of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. There is a way out. Step 3 is do it his way. Step 3 for me is real easy. Step 3, made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand it. It's I will or I won't. I will do it his way or I won't. And the only place that I have ever found God in any real or meaningful way is by taking the actions of this program of spiritual recovery that's contained in the Big Book and the 12 and 12. 4 is a moral inventory. 5 is that confession. 6 is willingness. 3 out of the 12 steps have to do with willingness. Willingness must be a big part of the program. I will or I won't. And so anyway, I went over to Mike's house, and I asked this guy to be my sponsor. And I meant to bring the pamphlet, Questions and Answers on Sponsorship, but Mike had a couple of those. And we sat down and went through the first part of that. The pamphlet's today it's in 4 sections, then it was only 3. But the first part is for the person looking for a sponsor, that'd be me. And then there's another portion for the person that wants to be a sponsor. Then there was a little section in the back for groups that want to engage in sponsorship activity. Now there's also a section back there on service sponsors. But as we started going through the first part of that pamphlet, Mike asked me, he pointed out that it said that AA began with sponsorship. With Bill and Bob, and Bill carried the message to Bob. And what was the message? The message is what I just told you. It was Silkworth's medical assessment of the condition of the disease, and it was Ebby's spiritual therapy. via the Oxford, the First Century Christian Fellowship and the Oxford groups. Now, the Oxford groups had the 4 absolutes, and the 4 absolutes were absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute love, and absolute purity. And Mike asked me, what's the difference between truth and honesty? And today I understand that truth is that which does not change. Truth is that which does not change. And honesty has to do with the intent to deceive, or the lack of it. And what we have is a program of rigorous honesty. And the examples that I was given is, 500 years ago, I could look you right in the eye and tell you in complete honesty, thank you, that you didn't want to sail too far in that direction because you'd sail right off the edge of the earth and the dragons would get you. Had nothing to do with the truth, but it was what people believed. And then 200 years after that, they knew that was a bunch of hooey. The earth is round. And also that the earth is the center of the universe. And the sun and the moon and the stars all revolve around the planet Earth, and I can prove it to you because you can watch the sun come up over there and traverse the sky and set over there. Had nothing to do with the truth. I think that we have a program of rigorous honesty, and what we're trying to do is discover the truth of our beings. I believe that the truth of our being is that we're spiritual beings living in a spiritual universe governed by spiritual laws, having a human experience. And absolute unselfishness. And I often hear people say that this is a selfish program. And I think, no, absolutely not. Selfishness is getting ahead at the expense of someone else. This is a program of enlightened self-interest. Enlightened self-interest blesses everyone. This is not a selfish program. It's about enlightened self-interest. And it's about carrying a message, about witnessing to each other, about being transparent. I loved listening to Gayla in her talk. It makes me want to be a better husband, a better spouse, a better partner to my wife. That transparency, that confession, that's honesty. That's what I want, and that's why I think we're all here. Unselfishness, absolute love. And I didn't know what love was when I got here. I'm still confused quite a bit. And I heard somebody say the other day, quoting Warren Buffett, if you're not confused, you don't know what's going on. Today I understand that love is the desire to do good for another. Best definition I've come across. Love is the desire to do good for another. And one of the reasons I love that is because then I can love my enemies. I can wish that God be in their life as God would be in their life. And if God's in their life the way that God would be in their life, I'm not going to have a problem with it. And then purity, absolute purity. And they talked about sexual purity. And we don't talk a lot about purity today. But I think much more than that. Not only did it encompass the sexual purity, but I think today we have a tendency, we would categorize it as integrity. And integrity is when I integrate my values into my behavior, not only my physical behavior, but my mental behavior. And I think that the third step says it very well in the 12 and 12 when it says that, our whole problem had been the misuse of willpower. We had tried to bombard our problems with it instead of trying to bring it into alignment with God's will for us. To make this, the bringing of my will into alignment with God's will for me, to make this increasingly possible is the purpose of AA's 12 steps. And step 3 opens the door. Absolute honesty, unselfishness, love, purity. And these are the guiding principles that are in our fellowship. Now, the problem that I see today, well-meaning as it is so many people say, well, my sponsor told me this or my sponsor told me that. And I think, man, that's not your sponsor. That's not what a sponsor is. What you're talking about is an unlicensed amateur therapist. Sponsorship is applying the principles that are in the steps. And as we say in Georgia, it ain't rocket science. I know, I sponsor a couple rocket scientists. They told me that ain't it. I worked through the steps a step a week with Mike. And he told me to come over to his house and bring my big book and my 12 and 12. And we would see what the program of recovery as it's outlined in our literature is. And what the big book says is that of those early people that came, of those early 100, thank you, she's telling me you're almost done. Aren't you glad? That of those early people that came in, half of them came and got sober and half relapsed. Relapse seems to be a condition in the fellowship. However, of the people that relapsed, half of those came back and got sober. And of the remainder, those that came back made progress. That's better than a 75% recovery rate if we follow the program as it's written. I've been sponsoring guys a step a week like this. I mean, when I got done with Mike, he said, service is not an option. There's 12 steps. And if we stay sober on 11, there'd only be 11. If we could stay sober on 5, there'd only be 5. We're addicts. We're not going to work one more step than the absolute minimum that it takes to stay sober. Service is not an option. I suggest that you go find someone to work with. Service it comes in two forms. There's the face-to-face that you do in carrying the message, and then there's the service that you do for your group. Because if the group doesn't make it, neither will you. This disease picks off the loners and the stragglers. It's what are you doing for your group? Find something, in the group to do, whether it's literature person or chairman or, in my case, chairman was I got to set up the chairs. Or inner group or the service structure, just work your way. Do something, Robert. Do it all. Find something you like. Don't do it all at once. And that's what you do for your group. And then there's the face-to-face, to carry the message, to work with the still suffering. That's our primary purpose. Our primary purpose is to carry that message. Confession, restitution, and service. And if you don't do service, you ain't going to make it. You ain't going to get it. I tell guys that I sponsor, if you're not carrying the message, we're going to change our relationship. You're fired. Because you ain't going to make it. You're just a pain in my heart waiting to happen. And my heart's got enough scars on it, I don't need any more. You're either willing to go to any length or you're not. And that's something that Mike asked me, right at the beginning. After we got done working through that program, he asked me this question. He said, Robert, are you willing to go to any length to have a spiritual experience sufficient to bring about recovery from your disease? And I said, yeah. When I got done working the steps, he said, carry the message. Go find someone to work with. Go find someone sicker than you are. I know that's going to be tough for you, Robert. But if you try real hard, you'll find someone. And I've been doing it that way ever since. Now, fast forward another 4 years, and I finally got in touch with my sexaholism and got into sexual recovery. And when I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, it was like somebody turned on a giant spotlight that was spirituality. And when I got sexually sober, it became a laser. And in living this program and practicing these principles on a daily basis to the best of my ability, as it's written in our program, in our literature, I have harmony in my life. I have peace, serenity, wisdom beyond my ability, strength, understanding, compassion, tolerance, pity. things of which I had little clue. And I find that when I get out of sync with my steps, when my program starts to fall down, and usually that comes when my meeting attendance falls off, or if I'm not working with sponsees, I just start getting a lot more discord. I find myself wanting to flip people off on the freeway. I haven't flipped them off in a long time. Or getting into arguments on people with some bureaucrat on the phone, or getting crosswise with people. And when I'm practicing my program, I have a lot more harmony. And I want to live in that harmony. That's where I want to live today. And I'm going to close with this. 2 things. 3. Bill Wilson wrote in the pamphlet, Questions Other Than Alcohol, that the sole purpose of an AA meeting is sobriety from alcohol through the teaching and practice of the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think SA would be well served to adopt that same guiding attitude. The sole purpose of an SA meeting is sobriety from lust through the practice and teaching of the 12 Steps of Sexaholics Anonymous. The group's primary purpose is to carry the message to the still suffering sexaholic. I think we need to do more in public information, cooperation with the professional community to get the name out there. We are not a secret society. We do have a program, a policy of public relations. It's not that we don't have the policy. Anonymity is different than confidentiality. I'll save that for a different talk. And lastly, as we work through the steps and we become transformed, we find that what the literature says is our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and our fellows. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and our fellows. And I'm going to close with something out of the Big Book, and it's in Dr. Bob's Nightmare. And he says, "It is a most wonderful blessing to be relieved of the terrible curse with which I was afflicted. My health is good, and I have regained the respect, my self-respect and the respect of my colleagues. My home life is ideal, and my business is as good as can be expected in these uncertain times. I spend a great deal of time passing on what I learned to others who want it and need it badly, and I do it for 4 reasons. A sense of duty. It is a pleasure, because in so doing I am paying my debt to the man who took the time to pass it on to me. And lastly, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. I'd like to thank you for having me here today."